Oh, there we are. Sorry. Now you can hear me. Shake your head if you can hear me. Okay. All I was saying is that we're going to share it on a couple of platforms and we're going to get rolling. We are live on YouTube.
Yay!
We are live on Facebook. And we will be live on 2 more platforms momentarily, and then we will get moving. One more share, and then we are good to go. Remember the rules, right? Okay, so sit quietly or go to your room, and then when it's time for the pokey, you'll do it. But not if you interrupt me. I'm live. I am live, which means I can't talk right now because I'm live. And so the conversation is hereby ended. Okay, we are ready to roll. Let me just let one more person in. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Parshas Va'era. It is the second portion in the book of Exodus. And I'd like to tackle something that was a novelty to me. And as I was studying it this week, it awakened many interesting thoughts as to what exactly went down and how do we fully comprehend the realities of the Moses experience when interacting with the Egyptians as a leader and the redeemer of the Jewish people. I want to express my gratitude to those who joined, even though you only found out this morning that we're moving it to Tuesday. There's sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. So between everything else going on and Javi being away this week and many having a soccer game tomorrow night and so many other things, it made sense to shift the class to Tuesday night. Those of you that couldn't be in person, you'll watch it on YouTube and Facebook afterwards. So I'm going to open the Chumash today for those that have the live Chumash that we use in the shul. At the bottom of page 360, the third Aliyah. So God is commanding Moses to go and chat with his brother Aaron. They should go have an interaction with Pharaoh about the redemption of the Jewish people. And the verse says, verse 29, God spoke to Moses saying, I am God. Tell over to Pharaoh everything that I speak to you. So far makes sense. God is telling him that I am God and I am commanding you to go talk to Pharaoh. But then in verse 30 it says, Moses said before God, but I have sealed lips, aral sfasayim. How will Pharaoh possibly listen to me? So it sounds like Moshe was using another excuse. Remember last week in the Torah portion, Moses told God about 22 reasons. I'm exaggerating, but he gave every excuse under the sun of why he shouldn't be the one. I have an older brother, Aaron. No one's going to listen to me. I have a speech impediment. But I want you to realize the words that he uses here is very unique. He says, Hein ani aral sfasayim, ve'eich yishma elai parai, but I have sealed lips. How will Pharaoh possibly listen to me? That's the words that Moses actually used. Why is that interesting? Because in last week's Torah portion, when Moses, at the burning bush, when Moses was telling God why he can't redeem the Jewish people, it says as follows. I'm going to read from chapter 4, verse 10 in last week's Torah portion, chapter 4, verse 10 in Shemos in the beginning of Exodus. It said like this, Moses said to God, I beg you, my master, I am not a man of words, not yesterday, nor the day before, nor from the very first time that you spoke to your servant. For I am heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. That's the literal translation. I'm heavy of mouth and I'm heavy of tongue. So God said, who gave man a mouth? or who makes a person dumb or deaf, sighted or blind? Is it not I, God? So now go, and I'll be with your mouth, and I will teach you what you should say. And then later he says to him, I'll send your brother with you. Isn't it fascinating to look from one Torah portion to the next? Last week, Moses had a heavy tongue and a heavy mouth, which loosely translated, he had a speech impediment. He had a lisp. It was hard for him to be the primary speaker in any environment, certainly to go speak to the Pharaoh and redeem the Jewish people. And then in this week's Torah portion, suddenly there's no lisp, there's no speech impediment, there's no heavy mouth and heavy lips, heavy tongue. It's Aral Sfasayim. He has sealed lips. Sealed lips? So in 1955 and again in 1969, the Rebbe addressed this topic. It then came together, was combined into an edited talk on this topic that was printed in volume 16 of the Rebbe's edited talks. And that's what I'd like to share with you tonight. And I think it's going to take us on a very interesting journey. You know, I read this week, I actually can't remember, I was thinking about it this afternoon, and I can't remember where I read it. I think, I read so many different books, but I think I might have read it in here. Let me just double check. Oh, it was this morning. It's a quote from the Alter Rebbe, from the founder of the Chabad movement, the author of Tanya. He says, it's not in Tanya, it's in one of his other writings, everyone that trusts in God automatically means that they have faith in God. But not everyone that has faith in God trusts in God. There's a lot of people that have faith. They believe God exists. They're not willing to let go and let God run the show. Like the Gemara, the Talmud says, the famous teaching, Gan va'apum machtarta rachmana karya, that a thief, by the way, if you ever want to practice your Aramaic, that's one of the great lines in Aramaic of the Talmud. Ganva apum machtarta rachmana karya, that a thief, just as he's about to sneak into the house to go on a robbery expedition, he calls out to God to ask for God's help. Doesn't he see the contradiction? How oxymoronic it is to ask God to help you be a thief? But the truth is that he doesn't, because he has faith in God, doesn't trust in God. So he believes that God exists. He just hasn't internalized it to the point where he's willing to let go and let God do what he has to do. And I share that because that's going to be part of today's discussion about the difference between sealed lips and just having a speech impediment. But let's start from the most basic. Last week, like I said, back to the question. Last week, Moses says to God, I have a speech impediment. I have a lisp. I am heavy in my mouth and heavy in my lips, my tongue. And God says, don't worry, Aaron's going to be there to translate for you, to give over the message. And over here, he basically says the same thing to God, except he doesn't really say the same thing, because here he refers to himself as Aral Sfasayim, that he has sealed lips. When you go back last week, Rashi tells us when he said that he has this heavy mouth and a heavy lips, or heavy tongue, Rashi says, B'chvedus ani medaber. I can speak, but I speak heavily. It's hard for me. It doesn't come out clear. Over here, when it says Aral Sfasayim, Rashi says Atum Sfasayim, totally sealed. When you seal, when you stuff something to the point where no air can come in or out, it's called, even in Israel till today, it's called Cheder Atum, I think it's called. Those security rooms that you go into are called, where it's totally sealed from that's the language that he's using this week, Moses, when he refers to his speech impediment. Suddenly it's not just an impediment, suddenly he's totally sealed, he's mute. He can't speak at all. So hold on. We went from Moses having a lisp or a speech issue, and now suddenly he's a mute. That's what Moses was telling God. So on the most basic level, and this is a novelty that I saw in the Rebbe's teaching, I haven't seen it anywhere else, and generally the Rebbe would have referenced to where else it says it if it said it somewhere else. The Rebbe says as follows. First, Moses, indeed, in the beginning, last week, when it started the conversation, he thought he just had a speech impediment. He just had a lisp. And therefore, he figured if Aaron can come along with him, which will explain what he's saying, he's going to speak in short, right? He'll give short statements, and then Aaron will go on deeper. So that should have been enough. Now that he came to the realization that not only does he have a speech impediment, but he actually doesn't really have the ability to speak at all. He's basically a mute. What's the point of me going to Pharaoh? So he's coming back to God again this week and says, God, well, I know you told me I should go with Aaron, but I don't understand why I'm going altogether. I realize that I don't just have a speech impediment. Now, did it progressively get worse from last week to this week? First of all, from last week to this week in the Torah is a few months. So maybe it actually got worse, or he just didn't realize how bad it was. And what did God tell him this week when he said, oh, I have sealed lips? God says, you will say everything that I command you. Meaning, even if nature says that you are a mute and you can't speak and you're concerned about that, I am guaranteeing for you, says God, that you'll be able to stand in front of Pharaoh, and when you open your mouth, you'll be able to speak. So, yeah, basically God was saying, just like I could turn the water into blood, and just like I could get frogs to go attack the nation, and lice and all the other 10 plagues, and take a staff and turn it into a snake, and your hand coming out of your bosom and have leprosy, tsaras on it, just like I can do everything else, I am going to take you, Moshe, who is clearly has some level of speech impediment, whether it was partially like last week or fully sealed like this week, and I'm going to clear that for you. You have nothing to worry about. So it's a bracha. It was a great blessing to Moses. But what the Rebbe does next in this sikha, in this talk, is, to me, miracles are impressive. I'm not going to say miracles are not impressive. Who wouldn't enjoy a miracle? But I enjoy a novel Torah interpretation with a heavy, heavy dose of Hasidic, Kabbalistic layers of understanding over a miracle. Because there's a joy, it says in Hasidus, and it says in Jewish philosophy books like Kuzari and others, Kuzari and the Maimonides and the Guide to the Perplexed, it talks about how there's different levels of pleasure. By the way, most people think of pleasure in a negative connotation, but it's not true. Obviously, there's eating food and there's sexual pleasures, but there's the pleasure of intellect. It's one of the highest levels of pleasure. There's the pleasure of music. It talks about, in Kudus Hamayim, it talks about the pleasure of music, the pleasure of an intellectual thought. So there's higher layers, higher planes of pleasure, and the pleasure of learning something in the Torah that you understood one way until today. And now you dig a little bit beneath the surface, you find a whole new layer of comprehension about this story. For me, I can't force it upon you, but for me, I think it's the reason I'm overweight, is that my body literally grows from the pleasure of enjoying these teachings. It says about the great Reb Nachum of Chernobyl, the great Hasidic master of Nachum Chernobler. It says that when he would get fat from saying Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba and Shul by Kaddish, he would have the joy and the excitement of answering and affirming God's oneness. Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba, may the name of God be exalted. He would get fat from it physically, because that's how much pleasure it gave him. So I'm just saying that if I ever wondered why it's not metabolism, it's not the food, it's the joy from a new layer of Hasidus on a biblical story. So what does the Rebbe say in that section? This is what he says, and I'm going to share it with you right now. Hasidus explains in multiple places. We're going to go back to last week for a moment. Why did Moses have to have a lisp, right? God couldn't find a leader that didn't have a lisp. Out of the whole Jewish people, you had to find the one guy who couldn't say a straight statement. Right? Remember we had a president that couldn't say nuclear? It happens. You know what? You have to pick one guy that can't say the words that are most necessary when you're president. I'm not judging their leadership. I'm just saying that they had it out of a whole country of 350 million people. You picked someone that thought Central America meant Kansas. How's that possible? And so, you like that, huh? So how's it possible that of all the Jewish people, God had to choose the one dude who has a lisp and can't even speak to Pharaoh? right? So it's you could say, well, I know God chose him. I'm asking you why God needed the one guy with the lisp. And that's the part that if you don't study Chassidus, you'll never understand. But when you study Chassidus, you're like, whoa, what's the whoa? Chassidus says that the fact that Moshe had a speech impediment, the fact that he couldn't speak properly, that he couldn't be such an egocentric, charismatic, eloquent speaker is because Moses did not live in the shadow of himself. He wasn't an egomaniac that needed to be important. It was all about being a fulfillment, a conduit for the fulfillment of God's wishes. And since everything was devoted to Hashem, why would he have to be able to speak? Speak to who? He didn't need to speak to anyone. His entire focus was going upwards for his inner bond with Hashem. He was in a state of self-transcendence where it was never about him, it was always about God. And therefore, there wasn't this major need for him to have an interaction with other people or to learn the eloquence or charisma that you need to speak to other people because he was in a state of bittul. So last week, when he said that he has a speech impediment, what did it mean spiritually? It meant that last week he was self-transcendent, focused on God on a lower level. This week, when it says that his mouth was sealed, he couldn't even utter a stutter. He couldn't even utter a word with a lisp. What it's saying is that Moses reached as he went into Egypt and as he accepted the mantle of leadership from God at the burning bush, and he comes to Egypt now, he is in such a state of subservience to God. He's in such a state of bittul. He's in such a state of self-transcendence where it's not about him and it's all about being in service of his creator that he literally couldn't open up his mouth because spiritually he was in a state of ecstasy and spiritual ecstasy and spiritual connection with God that speaking wasn't a necessary tool. No. When we say he couldn't, it means that spiritually he had lifted himself into a plane of spirituality, of interdependence on God, where God is everything, and he's sort of overtaken by the light of Hashem, that him being an important figure that has to open his mouth wasn't even an option. It's not about me. I'm a nobody. But not a nobody that goes around saying I'm a nobody, expecting that you should speak about them that are nobody. He really meant it, right? You know the story I've shared about the Slutsk Anov. There was a guy in the city of Slutsk. Slutsk is either in Lithuania or Belarus. I don't remember. But he would go in the bathhouse, the men's bathhouse, and he would say, do you want me to scratch your back? He had like a back scratcher. And he would say, do you want me to scratch your back? And they would say, no, you're the humble man of Slutsk. Slutsk Anov means the humble man. Oh, no, we would never ask a humble guy like you to scratch our back. One day, after years of doing that, there was a chassid in the bathhouse. And the chassid realized right away that the guy's full of it. It's a game that he plays. He wants everyone to know that he's so-called humble. So he said to the chassid, can I scratch you back? The chassid said, sure, absolutely. So he starts scratching his back. And the chassid said, ooh, a little bit more to the right, a little bit more to the left. And after 5 minutes, he finally says to him, are you crazy? What are you doing? You know that I'm the humble man of Slutsk. You're not supposed to make me do that. Right? It was a farce. It was a game. It wasn't real. Moshe wasn't a game. Moshe was the real deal. Moshe really didn't care about the likes on Facebook. You know the people that tell you they don't care about the likes, but really all they do is check the likes the whole day to make sure they got some? Moshe wasn't that. Moshe wasn't the guy that says, oh, it's not about me, it's all about God. And then really it's all about them. Moshe was the epitome of someone who literally didn't see the necessity for him to open his mouth to the point that he perhaps physically became a mute. He did not see the ability for him to utter a word. You know how they say sometimes about people that have special needs, like autistic children who can't speak, that they have these most incredible souls that they just don't know how to express themselves verbally, but they come, and I believe that to be true. Moshe was in the spiritual plane, a spiritual plane that he worked on. He built himself up because last week he was just an impediment. This week he was sealed off, and he was such in a state of spiritual ecstasy, of devotion to God and self-transcendence that uttering a word seemed impossible to him. But then God said to him, what do you mean? I'm sending you to Pharaoh. Right? Now remember, Pharaoh at this point was at the epitome of his strength. He was the king of the empire, and the empire was big. Nothing in the world besides for God could overcome Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the top of the top, right? There's a reason why it says in the Talmud, in Brachot, in the 7th page of the Talmud, right at the beginning of the Talmud, it says, if you see a wicked person that's doing well, don't mess with them. When God gives power to evil, unless you have the power to deal with it, be careful. Because when evil raises its ugly head, it's dangerous. One part of us poo-poos it. And I'm not saying you need to be scared. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying don't instigate, don't get in the way of evil people when they raise their head, because they're evil. The Gemara says that, the Talmud says that. So Pharaoh, being the king of the greatest empire of the time, is now in his prime. He is rolling. No one's messing with Pharaoh. Not even an individual slave could ever escape from Egypt. Moshe is like, I can't speak to that dude. I'm all about God, but I mean, how do I take this guy on? And when he had a speech impediment last week, he wasn't able. God sent him to Egypt, but by the time he actually went to the Pharaoh, he wasn't in a state of speech impediment. He was in a state of having sealed lips. He reached the higher level of bittul, and then nothing mattered. Because like I said in the beginning of the class, last week I spoke about Moses' lack of trust when he was worried about the Egyptian. Right? Remember that whole class last week was about how he should have trusted that he would be okay. He should have never been scared of the Pharaoh or about the gossipers. Clearly, Moshe learned from last week. Meaning he changed in his years at the burning bush. When time he comes back to Egypt, he's reached the total transcendence that he should have had back 60 years ago when he was 20 years old. Now he's 80. His brother Aaron's 83. They're going to redeem the Jewish people. And God says, you have nothing to worry about, sweetie, because you don't have a speech impediment anymore. You're telling me you have sealed lips, which was your excuse for why you shouldn't be able to go to Pharaoh. And what God answers them, because you have sealed lips, because you reached that level of spirituality, that's exactly why you're going to succeed with Pharaoh. Because when you enter Pharaoh's palace, it's not going to be about you. It's going to be totally about God, not your fears, not your insecurities, not your trauma, not your background. None of that is going to be relevant. You're simply going to go with God into Pharaoh, which is, by the way, as a side note, next week's Torah portion, not this Shabbos, but next Shabbos, begins with the words, Bo El Paro, which, boy, right? Bo El Paro, the portion of Bo. What does that mean? It means, normally in Hebrew, Bo El Paro means come to Pharaoh. Come to Pharaoh. Shouldn't it be Lech El Paro, go to Pharaoh? The Rebbe actually spoke about this just about a month before he had a stroke and stopped talking in 1992. The Rebbe spoke about this. Bo El Paro is God telling Moses, what are you worried about? Come along with me to Pharaoh. What do you mean come along with me? Come along with who? God is telling Moses, you come along with me, meaning I'm leading the way. What are you worried about? That you have a speech impediment? Quite the contrary. Speech impediment would have been problematic, but now that your lips are sealed, which means now you've reached a grade of such a pure and holy and submissive state to God, you have nothing to worry about. I'm going to lead the way. And there'll be nothing to stop because it's not about you. Because what normally gets in the way of our mission in this world? So let me tell you, I'm going to break it to you. Ego, arrogance. It's the source, power, money, all of that is all offshoots of ego. Right? Why is somebody not happy when they have $1,000? They need 10,000. Why is a person that has $1 million not happy? They want $1 billion. Because it gives them more power. Why do people need power? Because they want to be more powerful than others. They think it makes them strong. It's all about arrogance. And there's one thing it says, God can deal with all types of issues, all types of spiritual ailments. And we're going to talk about this at great length later in Tanya. But it says, there's only one type of person that God says, I can't live with them. Who can God not live with? Can't live with someone that's arrogant. There's no room. right? The famous question. Seth just alluded to it, right? They asked for Mendel of Kutz, where is God? His Hasidim asked him, where is God? And he said, wherever they let him in. Right? They were waiting for some great, brilliant, scholarly, Hasidic master answer. The answer is, you know where God is? Wherever they let him in. Wherever they don't put their ego and their arrogance to block God's access code. So when you look at the story of Moses and Pharaoh, the incredible lesson is everyone's got their baggage, but you want to know when you can count, when you could take on all of your demons, all of your pharaohs, all of your obstacles, all of those villains that are destroying your life. It needs to start when you're able to let go of all your issues and allow God to hold your hand. Because when God's holding your hand, turns out God is infinite, so he can take on those obstacles. When you're trying to do it alone, it's a lost cause. How are you going to do it alone? You know, America came up with this cockamamie idea called the self-made man. What does that even mean? First of all, what about self-made women? That's a side note. Second of all, what does it even mean for a person to say they're self-made? What does that mean? That they made a few dollars and they think they're a big success story? How many people did better than them in the workplace? Smarter than them? More successful than them? More articulate than them? More resourceful than them? And yet they didn't make that money? It's not about them. It's about God. So when we allow God into our lives, when we learn not to only have faith, this is one of my personal struggles. I speak about it openly, so I don't mind sharing it. I obviously have an incredible amount of faith in Hashem. And occasionally I even have trust in Hashem. But I look at Chavi all the time, I'm like, man, do I wish I had the trust in Hashem like she does. The things that would drive me crazy, that do drive me crazy. When you don't have control, and she's able to sit back and go, well, it's obviously Hashem's plan. Like, what do you mean? This is crazy. Do you know what this is going to do? Do you know what this is doing? Da, 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 da. You go on your whole rant, and she's like, what happened to trust in Hashem? Trust in Hashem is not theoretical. We don't want to be like the thief who says, hey, God, please help me out when I do this robbery. That's faith. You want internalizing. And God said to Moshe, now that you finally internalized from your previous mistakes, your previous lack of trust, and you have real trust, because you're going to go to Moses not as a representative of yourself. We see that, by the way, in the story of Purim. I don't want to get on a tangent, but we see it in the story of Purim. It was counterintuitive. Purim's coming up in, 6 weeks or so, 7 weeks or so. March 3rd. Esther, the queen, finally gets on board with Mordechai. We got to encounter the king. And what does she say? She has to go present herself, and the king hasn't called her to the palace in so long. And if you were picked in a beauty pageant, the logical thing would be that if you're going to go to the king and you want to appeal to him so that he puts out his scepter and welcomes you in, despite the fact that he hasn't called on you in a long time, that you'd go to the beauty parlor, you go to the salon, you'll do your nails, you get a pedicure and a manicure and a facial, you'll stick cucumbers in your eyes and peppers in your ears and garlic in your nose and whatever they do over there to make you people, you'll get a massage, you'll get acupuncture, you'll get a hairdo, then you'll put on some very attractive clothing and you'll march your way into the royal chambers of the king, hoping that he puts out his scepter. What did Esther do? She said, let's fast for 3 days and 3 nights. No eating, no drinking. What does that do to your beauty? Not only that, let's get all the Jews in the whole empire to fast for 3 days and 3 nights. And then I will come to the palace and I'll tell the king, hopefully he'll put out the scepter. It made no sense. If you were chosen for your beauty, why would you fast for 3 days and 3 nights? No eating, no drinking. You're going to look like a half-dead queen. Maybe he'll never put out the scepter. But Esther understood, and perhaps it was Mordechai's guidance, but she understood at the moment of truth that it's not about how you look. It's about who are you going with. Are you going with God or are you going alone? If you're going alone, you will fail. If you go with God, then if God wills it, you will succeed. So she prepared herself spiritually to go into the king, and she worried a lot less about her physical demeanor and about her physical presentation. Moshe learned that. Hold on, Ezzy's going to bark at Seth, so give us a second. Very good. You can let her on, Pokey, please. I did. Okay, thank you. So Moshe Rabbeinu teaches us this week an incredible lesson in humility about taking ourselves out of the conversation, and it's not easy. Ask yourself how often you get in the way of yourself because your ego's in the way. I ask myself that all the time. Every time I argue with Chavi, every time I have a run-in with my kids, I can't say every time, but I'll say at least 89% of the time, there's ego involved. And I'm being gracious, probably 96% of the time, but I want to give myself some credit because I still have an ego. So I'm going to say 89% of the time. It's not about altruism. It's not about being right. It is about being right, but it's more than that. It's like, how dare someone have a different opinion that happens to be right? How dare someone see the world different than I, the one and only illustrious Chief Rabbi of Montana, esteemed son-in-law? How could someone have a different opinion than me? It's ego. Someone hurts your feelings. It's ego. Halacha talks about it. I'm not saying it's okay for people to hurt your feelings, but there's a system how you forgive and don't carry grudges and so on and so forth. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't just telling God, I got a speech issue. He was saying, I don't feel like, I just want to bond with you. I don't feel like I should be the representative and the leader of the Jewish people. And God said, that's nice. Now go to Egypt. Then he gets to Egypt and he says to God, I'm telling you, it's worse. I can't even speak. And God's like, oh, finally you realize it's not about you. It's about being my representative. And now that you are my representative, you have nothing to worry about. I go with you in this process. And if I'm with you, you can conquer any Pharaoh in your life. So whatever the Pharaoh is in your lives, whatever the big super demon, the big super black hole, the big super villain, the big super dictator in your spiritual well-being that is messing with your head and messing with your emotions and messing with your spirituality, that's giving you anxiety and stress and temptation and anger and all the midas magunas, the arrogance and the narcissism and all the negative traits that we all have, jealousy and so on and so forth. Remove them from you. And the more you remove, not overnight, but the more you remove the self-indulgent, self-absorbed, self-aggrandizement from your vocabulary and your worldview, your Weltanschauung, your worldview, the quicker you will find healthier relationships, the quicker you will find a path to bond with God in a way that you never did before, the easier time you will have, not a guarantee, but the easier time you will have trusting God, which in itself is the biggest blessing. Right? What's the biggest blessing? To get rid of anxiety. Not to have anxiety. It's not novel. And how do you get rid of that? But realizing God is in charge. But that happens through internalizing the Moses mistake from last week and the Moses movement, growth, progress this week, which allows us to put our own issues aside. No one ever sat on their deathbed saying, I wish more people would have spoken about me. No one sat on their deathbed saying, oh, I wish I had more power. Many people have sat on their deathbed wishing that they would have put their ego aside and had healthier relationships with God and their fellow human beings, with their spouse, with their kids, with their siblings. That's not easy. And by the way, we're experts in giving excuses for why our ego is important. By the way, a healthy world self-esteem is important. I'm not talking about being a shmata. I'm not talking about being a rug for people to step on. Self-esteem is wonderful. Arrogance is ugly and disgusting. Moses taught us this week how to do it right. And when we have God in the picture, no Pharaoh in the world can stop us from fulfilling our mission, fulfilling our purpose, and being a beacon of light, godliness, holiness, goodness, ethics, morals, values in this world, and making this world a dwelling place for Hashem. I want to thank you again for joining us on Tuesday night. I know it was off schedule. It happens. It's part of life. And I look forward to seeing you back here next week. Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach, with God's great and amazing blessings. I'd like to thank you, Yaakov James, for sending the beautiful new book. And to all of you, may it be an inspiring and uplifting week. Today is Chavdalat Teves. Today, I mean, it's already night, but today was the 24th of Teves, the day that the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, the author of the Tanya, passed away on the 24th of Teves in 1812, in December of 1812. It's a very powerful day. May the power of this week, by the author of the Tanya, guide us to search deeper and deeper and never be happy with just the outer layer of Torah. Keep digging and digging, because the deeper you dig, the more treasures of Torah interpretation you shall find. Sei gesund, and we'll see you back here soon.